we have this period of time where the world suddenly decides to move on from
Mhm.
COVID
Yeah,
collectively, right? And
yeah,
it happened largely globally within a period of 3 to 6 months. Like the world
yeah,
suddenly decided we're done with that. It's cost us too much money.
yeah,
We're off. And it pulls the rope ladder up on the ship and goes, right, we're off. And there's a whole section of the community stood there looking at this ship going, hang on a minute.
yeah,
Like this isn't over for a
yeah,
section of society. And I made a note there. People are vulnerable. And this was the other framing I wanted to try and
mm,
put forward. This is a problem of the built environment.
yeah,
People they didn't and don't get sick from COVID outside in the park, but much as we banned people from the park at the beginning when we didn't really know what we were doing. But this is a problem of the built environment.
yeah,
And the reason this is an accessibility issue is, as Kath Noakes, who was,
yes,
from Leeds and a very prominent voice during the time, what COVID asked of us was not whether buildings were a problem or not. What did we actually know about the buildings that we own and
yeah,
manage? And the answer to that question was sweet F all.
yeah,
That actually the answer that came back was, well, nobody's been paying any attention to ventilation and air quality in
yeah,
our built environment ever. We don't know what our classrooms are doing, frankly. We
mhm,
have no idea what our office spaces are doing, quite frankly, or our homes or almost any other part of the built environment. In fact, even most parts of the medical sector, we didn't
yes,
really know that most of our hospital environment is older buildings that are naturally ventilated. We came to that period of time where the rope ladder's being pulled up, and the reason people are being left behind is because our built environment was not prepared and is
mhm,
still not prepared to manage ventilation and infection risk in a
mhm.
way that includes everybody.
Obviously, sort of July 2021 was the kind of the Freedom Day, the lifting of all the brakes, and we were kind of left on our own. And obviously, we were still, still then, still are now, very conscious of the fact that any infection could have a significant impact on my husband's kidneys. But I've been reinfected since I've had two infections, one in November 2022, and it floored me. I was taken out for 3-4 weeks, and it was awful. 2021, we were still super aware of the fact that although the rhetoric from government was this is over, it felt an awful lot like people were just burying their heads in the sand, because actually the collective trauma, it was just easier to pretend like it wasn't a thing, to just move on. And so we headed back to school in September 2021, and I was already, had been in the terms previous to that, but I became very vocal about advocating for HEPA filters in our classrooms. And I was on the board of our nursery, our preschool nursery as well. So I was, advocating there for HEPA filters. I was successful in getting HEPA filters into our nurseries, which was great. But the experience with the primary school was no, they didn't want to hear about it. School was safe. By October 2021, there was no longer any testing requirements, there were no isolation requirements, and infectious children were allowed back in school. And I remember going on half term and thinking, what are we going to do here? This is an unacceptable level of risk. How are we meant to navigate this now, where my child could go to school and bring home an infection that could kill daddy? It felt insurmountable. And at the same time, Australia reopened its borders, and I said to my husband, we've got to go home. We've got to go back to Australia. Friends in the UK said, why are you going back to Australia? They'll do the same thing. I was like, no, Australia's never going to abandon public health measures. And we got back here in December 2021, literally the week that Dominic Perrottet, who is the Premier for New South Wales, pulled the same Freedom Day for New South Wales, and it was really traumatizing. So we arrived back, and then we went through deja vu, and I had exactly the same experience. My son was still in preschool, and my daughter was going back into primary. So I began advocating to the preschool and the primary for the HEPA filters. And I think maybe CO2 monitors, by that stage, I'd kind of learned about CO2 monitoring and the opportunities there as well. The preschool accepted it gladly. very, it was at that stage it was a 50 centimeter, box fan, Corsi Rosenthal box, which I bought. And you mentioned Kath Noakes earlier. I kind of credit all of my kind of learning around indoor air quality to people like Kath, and to Richard Corsi and Kimberly Prather and all of these incredible scientists on Twitter. Those early kind of years on Twitter, where these incredible scientists were sharing the latest research and the latest innovations, was just, I feel very lucky that I had access to their knowledge through that. So yeah, I built this giant Corsi Rosenthal box, and I put really big googly eyes on it, and because it was for a preschool, right? But the school didn't want to hear about it. The school was safe. So exactly the same language came out of the Australian primary school as came out of the UK, which I thought was really interesting. And I mean, obviously, I'm like a dog with a bone, right? There's a reason I founded a charity, because I can't put this away.